Hi, I'm Aaron Tomlinson and welcome back to the channel. In this short video, I want to talk about the difference between spiritual bypassing and spiritual empowerment. Now, when we talk about spirituality, it's kind of messy, right? Because we're dealing, even by definition, if you were to look up the definition of spiritual in the dictionary, you would find that it has to do with things that relate to the spirit or soul, or specifically to non-material reality. And I can't emphasize that enough. We're dealing with non-material reality, which is why I find the arguments from the new atheists, whether it be Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris, I find their arguments to be not compelling for me because they're strictly applying the presuppositions and philosophies of scientific materialism to something that doesn't even make the category to fit scientific materialism in a simple dictionary definition. So if you're a scientific materialist, you want to define everything in terms of observation, measurability, everything that's out there that's physical, that's material, whether it be matter or whether it be energy or whether it be fields, those kinds of things. And then they try to use that and apply that. They take a different category and try to apply it to spirituality. For me, it's comparing apples and oranges, and I don't find the arguments formidable or convincing at all. Because I do think that there is a spiritual side to humanity. It just fits in a totally different category. Now, having said that, that makes it very subjective, at least from the scientific point of view. So we are dealing with people's subjective experiences when we talk about their inner life, their soul, their spirit, their mind, their consciousness in any way, shape, or form. So when we're talking about something that's spiritual, again, we're dealing with something that's non-material, and so that can make it a little bit problematic. So let's look at spiritual bypassing. Let me give you a definition for spiritual bypass. This comes from Wikipedia. It says spiritual bypass or spiritual bypassing is a, quote, tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Now, this is all dealing with your inward life as well. You can't see an emotional wound. You can't measure it. You can't observe it. You can't necessarily repeat it. It doesn't fit any category of scientific materialism. And yet, who can deny the pain of losing a loved one, or the psychological pain that we have, or unfinished developmental tasks? That can't be measured at all. So while this definition is dealing completely with the subjective, I would also include dealing with objective reality or difficult to deal with situations, problems that we have in our lives. And so spiritual bypassing is using another subjective mechanism or spirituality to avoid dealing with the real issues of life, or to suppress psychological wounds or emotional wounds or unfinished developmental tasks. And I can tell you, as a therapist who has worked with people for over 25 years, I can tell you that probably the hardest one of those to address are the undeveloped areas where we missed a developmental window somewhere in childhood, and so we didn't complete a task or resolve a crisis, as Erik Erikson would talk about it, in order to move on to the next stage. And that can leave us psychologically hindered. That can leave us emotionally hindered. That can leave us relationally hindered. And so we all have to deal with these things. We all have our own junk, so to speak. We all have our unfinished business, so to speak. And so spiritual bypassing is using another subjective reality, what we believe about the unseen world, what we believe about the world that transcends physical reality or the limitations of scientific materialism, including human experience, which we just talked about. But typically there's things in spirituality that involves things like the idea of God or angels or higher beings or higher vibrations. So we try to use subjective realities, meaning spiritual realities, to address these problems. And we can do it in one of two ways. We can do it with what's called spiritual bypassing, where we use spirituality as a way to escape these problems. We use spirituality as a way to think about these problems as though we can get out of them, that we don't have to address them, that we don't have to face them, that we don't have to overcome them. And so we see this a lot. I saw this a lot in Christianity, where people would just hear words from God or affirmations from God or things that they thought were from God or whatever the source was, right? For us, it was definitely the Holy Spirit or God or Jesus, to not address or deal with their own internal issues or external issues, as the case may be. Another great example of spiritual bypassing is this Bible prophecy, apocalyptic rapture fever that we see that comes around every few years and has been wrong 100% of the time. And yet we use it. I remember one particular situation I was facing in my life as a 19-year-old when I was really into the rapture theories and apocalyptic biblical revelation. And I remember praying in this moment that I had to address something and face something that was difficult for me and saying to the Lord, boy, this would be a great time for the rapture. I saw this same thing in the New Age community, in the metaphysical community, whether it's trying to ascend to a higher density or whether it's trying to raise our vibrations so we don't have to deal with what we consider lower energies like pain and grief and anger. And all of these things can become examples of spiritual bypassing that cause a person, if they do it over a long period of time, to completely disconnect from reality, to completely disconnect from their own authentic selves and their own lives and live in kind of a fairy tale or a fantasy. But just because they're spiritual bypassing does not mean that there is not spiritual empowerment. It all depends on our approach. So if there are, and I believe there are, states of consciousness that can be empowering to us, it could be intuition, it could be wisdom that comes to us not through external sources, but from within. Again, we're talking about intuition. It could be tapping into energy currents or spiritual flows of power and life that give us, that is there to give us the ability to address our issues rather than escape our issues. So I'm 100% on this channel for spirituality, and I'm advocating for a third way, a way that does not depend on organized religion or external doctrines that cause you to lose your authentic self, and does not depend on, okay, spirituality and consciousness doesn't exist, and all that exists is what can be measured in this world, and I'm only going to depend upon, like the new atheists try to encourage people, I'm only going to depend upon what can be objectively verified scientifically. That's the only reality that there is. That's not the only reality there is, because if nothing else, your own psychological wounding proves to you that that's not all that there is. And so we can go to one extreme or the other. We can go to extreme religious fervor and fundamentalism and use that as a form of spiritual bypassing. We can get into spirituality, our own subjective experiences of non-material reality, and use that in our imagination and our mind as a way to escape the problem. Or we can believe that there are currents of power, currents of energy, wisdom in spiritual paths, intuition, all kinds of resources that we have within us, untapped potentials, untapped spiritual abilities, untapped spiritual empowerment. And rather than escaping into that, we can use that to empower us to deal with our situations in life. So for me, any spiritual path that's worth its weight, that can deliver the goods, is something that we can experience on the subjective planes, on the conscious planes, on the immaterial planes, on the unseen planes, that empower us to deal with our traumas, that empower us to overcome our developmental deficiencies, that empower us to bring something magical, yes, magical, into the physical world, to influence it and change it according to our will, so that we are using our spirituality to empower us to deal with ourselves and to deal with life and face life, rather than offering us an escape hatch whereby we spiritual bypass. And the difference is going to come from the perspective and the intention of the individual. If we see only material resources as our means of coping with psychological stress, if we see only material resources as our only resources for dealing with where we missed developmental windows in our lives, then again, we're comparing apples and oranges, and we're not probably going to be very effective or successful in addressing these issues. On the other hand, we can submit ourselves to a spiritual path and to spiritual realities that then empower us to do real shadow work, that empower us to bring real healing to our traumas, and empower us to face life with confidence and empowerment rather than with weakness and from a place of fear where we try to escape what's going on through some doctrine, some fundamentalism, some religious con, or some spiritual con. And again, I want to emphasize this. The difference comes from the perspective and the intention of the person. So I want to encourage you to use your spirituality as a resource to address things in this life, not to get away from them. To use your spirituality to address issues within you on the consciousness level and the subjective level, rather than trying to escape them. And fortunately, these can be very powerful and very profound resources for us that can absolutely transform our lives. I converted to religion because I found spiritual resources within myself on a subjective level to address traumas and issues and obstacles that I was facing in my life. And then I merged or married the religious doctrines with the spiritual resources. And I think it's important that we're able to make those distinctions. So this is a very short video. I hope that it speaks to you. I hope that it helps you. Thank you for watching it till the end. If you have not joined the New Day global group on Facebook, we have a private group where I'm excited about doing some things with that. Please, you'll find the link in my bio. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel, hit all the buttons below, comment for the algorithms, and I will be with you again shortly. Coming up in the next year, I'm going to be doing a lot more content on how we can access genuine spiritual resources, how we can access hidden, latent potential powers within our own selves, and how we can use spirituality to overcome and to address our problems from a place of empowerment rather than using it as a place of spiritual bypass. Again, I'm Aaron Tomlinson. Thank you for joining me for this video, and I will see you again soon.